What's up, Covalence friends? Today, we're going to be playing around with a bunch of different web components using the library Shoelace. So let's get right into it. All right, so we're starting with our Express template repo, which the link to that repo is actually in the description below. If you want to go ahead and just clone that, you can. But it's just a really simple Express server. It literally just starts a server up on port 3000. It has a few like default routes for an API, like a REST API. But you could use whatever you want. It's really not that important. You could even just have an index.html. The way that we're doing this, we're going to use a CDN to kind of import all the components, and these are all web components, and so you don't need any type of framework or compiler or anything. But we're using TypeScript just because I like TypeScript, and I think it just makes things a little bit easier. And so basically what we're going to do first is we're going to pull up the website, and we're going to check out what Shoelace is. So Shoelace is a component library built entirely of web components, which if you don't know what web components are, they're basically kind of an answer to a lot of these different frameworks that have been popping up. So Angular was really kind of the first one to really make, web components all the new hype, but realistically web components didn't exist back in the day. Angular kind of invented them using their directives and their custom components, and these are the actual standardized versions of those. So these are native HTML elements that are basically defined in JavaScript using this global custom elements object, and we can actually define these. They extend native elements, and you can create them using this actual class definition here that will extend something like an HTML paragraph element or just an HTML element, but it'll actually extend that, and we're able to add actual functions, some properties to it that will be accessible via JavaScript. And so it's actually a super cool way to be able to create your own actual elements that you can reference in the page. And when you actually put them in your HTML, you put them in there exactly like any other HTML element. So you might notice that this looks familiar from if you use something like Angular or React or Platypus TS. Good name drop there. But again, these all will actually be recognized by your HTML browser, or sorry, by the browser as valid HTML, and also by CSS as valid selectors. So that's something, if you're used to using something like Angular and you were to put these in the DOM, you can actually select this using this as an actual selector. Like it won't select this element in CSS, for instance. You actually have to add a class, but with these you can actually modify them with true standardized CSS. So you can actually reference pop-up info and it will change that in CSS. So that's super cool. And again, you can actually extend any of the other native elements that already exist, and that makes it super expandable, and it also makes it super extensive, right? And so you can keep extending onto these. You can extend this class now to add additional functionality, and you can kind of keep going from there, right? All right, so enough about web components. I definitely highly suggest that you check out web components. I just realized that this wasn't very zoomed in, but again, we will go back through again. Here's the pop-up info here, right? That would be the pop-up info that you defined here in JavaScript. And there are some caveats to this. We'll get into this, but again, a lot of times the browsers load fast enough to where it shouldn't really matter. But we will kind of go over a couple of those, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So again, we are going to go back to this overview, and let's go ahead and you can check out all the different components that something like Shoelace has. So this is just a great starting point because a lot of these you could create yourself, but why would you want to if it's already been done? Don't reinvent the wheel. And a lot of these are really useful components, right? And so you don't have to use their button, but the button actually adds a little bit of extra functionality that you might want to use, right? All right, and so let's go ahead and we are going to check out their installation guide. And they have a CDN, and this is definitely by far the easiest way to install this library. So you can just literally copy this CSS and this JavaScript, and we're going to go into our index.html, and we're going to pop it right in there. So we're going to use the style sheet up there, and you could load the JavaScript in your head, or you could load it in your body. Now, I like to, by default, load everything in the body. And so let's load this first, and then we'll load our app.js. And we should be good to go ahead. Now that we have this, we can go ahead and just use our components. So let's go ahead and pull up a component real quick, and we're going to, let's see, check some of these out. And the nice thing about this too is that web components are nice because they're not framework specific. So if you're used to using like, something like React or Angular, and then if you're working for a consulting agency or something along those lines, a lot of times you get thrown into projects that are using something completely different, right? And so you've probably seen that there are component libraries for Angular, and then there are totally different component libraries for something like React. And that can kind of get confusing, and you kind of have to become this jack of all trades where you know which component libraries to use for which framework. And everyone has a different interface, and there's different functions for each, and it can get just overwhelming, right? And so with something like Shoelace, you can't use the same code across all the frameworks, but you can at least use the same components. So you know the interface, you know the functions, and you know how to actually work with them. And so I feel like it's definitely a game changer for people who are doing many different projects and need to be able to pump out these solutions quickly, and good solutions too, right? So these aren't half-baked components. These are very good. They're pretty robust, and they have a lot of different options and extensibility. And like I said, you can even extend them yourselves, which is even nicer. And so again, if you don't use the CDN and you install locally, there are some issues with that because it is a module based project. And so you'd actually, for instance, like our template, for instance, is only set up to do Common.js. I'll probably do a future video where we can convert that into a module, ESM module based project. And then once we do that, we could easily just kind of import or use the npm module for Shoelace. But for right now, we're just going to stick with the CDN because it's simple and will get us actually using these components. And so if you wanted to bundle it using something like Webpack, you could do that. You have to set the base path because a lot of these components, they use assets, right? They use things like images, fonts, things like that. And so to do that, you actually have to tell the framework where those assets are. And so if you were to use something like Webpack, you'd want to copy all the assets into your own folder, and then you'd be able to tell Shoelace that folder path, and then it'll be able to reference all those assets. And so it's pretty nice if you only want to use, they have a concept called cherry picking in here. And cherry picking is basically just only using certain components instead of just importing the entire library. When you do the CDN, it's actually going to download this entire library. And so it might take a little bit. It might not be the quickest thing in the world. And so if you wanted to cherry pick, you could, simply only use the components that you're looking to use, right? Which is very nice as well. So it's not just UI components. They have things like utilities. So like this is a really cool one. It's actually a GIF or a WebP player, I guess you'd say. So it doesn't, have you ever seen players that have, GIFs or WebPs animated in the background? It just runs automatically, and it's very distracting. So being able to pause them, I think they use something like Canvas for this. It's very cool. You can now play the GIF, and you can pause it if you want. It's pretty awesome. And then they have things like formatting dates and numbers, which you don't have to import something like Moment. You can just it uses the International Datetime Format API internally. And so regardless of where you actually are locally, right? So English, French, Russian, right? It all actually formats them according to the locale, which is awesome. Same thing with formatting numbers. If you ever made an app, not just for, one language, that things like commas and periods are switched out all the time. And so being able to have the localization for that is extremely nice, and it makes sense, right? So let's say for English 2000 versus German versus Russian, it all is a little bit different. They use spaces instead of periods instead of commas, right? So again, very nice as well with currencies. So it's pretty cool. It really does add a lot of additional functionality, and there's obviously a lot of other extremely awesome things that you can play around with as well. So highly recommend that you play around with web components, and then I also highly recommend that you play around with a lot of these components as well. But let's go ahead and just let's go ahead and use one of these real quick. So we're going to take a look at the HTML here, and we're going to kind of just pull this drawer in real quick. So let's go ahead, we're going to copy these elements, and we're going to put them right into our DOM. And so we can see here that we have this drawer, and then we have, the drawer contents in here, and then we have a close button here, right? And so we're going to be able to actually just pull up our index.ts, not our index.ts, we're going to want to go into public.js app.ts, and we're going to want to change this function altogether. So we can say const drawer equals, and like I said, you can actually just query the selector, which is awesome, and you'll be able to query SL drawer, or you'll be able to query this class. So whatever you want to do. Let's just do SL drawer, and then we can say const open drawer button, and we'll say document.query selector, and we'll give it a class real quick. We'll just call it open drawer, and then const close drawer button equals document.query selector, and we'll say close drawer. All right, let's go ahead and let's add those classes. So this will be class close drawer. We could query it using something like the slot or the variant, but let's just keep it as a class for now. All right, and all right, this should be good. We have our buttons. We have our drawer here. We could say if, not drawer or not open drawer button or not close drawer button. Right, then we want to just return. We could console.log something. You messed up. Frowny face. All right, and then otherwise, we want to add some event listeners. So open drawer button dot add event listener. We'll say click. And we'll say close drawer button, and it'll be basically the exact same thing. So let's go ahead and just copy that. And in here, what we're going to actually want to do is we're going to say drawer dot, and then we want to actually have the function itself, right? And so that would be extremely nice to be able to actually have this. Now, if we were using a module, like an ESM module-based project, we could just import it. Unfortunately, we are not doing that. So let's see, we could potentially, let's just try this real quick. Let's try include. There is a way to do this. If we were to include, this is actually just on the fly. Let's see if this works. Include node modules / at shoelace style / well, let's open this up real quick, because they do come with type definitions. So, oh, it doesn't like something. What's it saying? Specify include password and exclude password. No inputs were found in config file. All right, we'll revisit this in a second. All right, but let's go ahead and pop open our node modules. Oh, so we actually haven't installed the node module itself, right? Because we're using the actual CDN. Now, I wonder if we could include a CDN link. Let's try that real quick. I don't know if this works at all. Let's just say HTTPS shoelace.d.ts. Does this work? I don't think it's going to. But if we were to say something like SL drawer, yeah, it seems like it's not going to actually work. But what we could do instead is we could just define our own interfaces here. So we could say something like interface drawer, and we're going to say it extends HTML element, and we're going to have show void hide void, and this is going to be a drawer here, and in here we're going to say drawer.show, and in here we're going to say drawer.hide. All right, so we can get rid of this include. I'm not sure why it's erroring. It would be cool if you could do that. All right, so get rid of that error. And we are going to now run this terminal, and we're going to say let's go ahead and do our npm run dev. I already npm installed on this, by the way, so we had our packages installed. We could try npm installing the Shoelace style npm package and trying to use the actual .d.ts file, but I'm going to go ahead and just not worry about it right now. So let's go ahead and pop this open real quick. Localhost 3000. All right, so you saw that kind of initial loading phase, right? Which was weird. So we can pop open this drawer. We see this drawer kind of out of the box. It closes, really cool. But you did see that, like, that flash, right? Which is kind of annoying, right? And the reason that that happens is, again, if you're an Angular developer or you come from that world, you know that it's loading the DOM before the custom elements are actually defined, right? And so what's happening is that we have the script in our body, and so it sees all of this, but it doesn't know what to do with it yet, right? And so it doesn't know what to do with it until it actually loads this script and then registers this element. And so basically, we need to be able to hide this element, and the way that you can do this is you could just kind of have the display none on the body, or you could set a display at an opacity of 0 on the body, and then you could have, when everything loads or is done loading, you could actually set the body to an opacity of 1, and it'll like slowly kind of animate in the body, which is honestly probably the most elegant way to do it. Another way to do this is that we could go into our CSS and we could say not defined, and we could say visibility hidden. We could say display none. The problem with display none is that it actually removes it from the DOM entirely, or visibility hidden just kind of, you know, hides it. You could say opacity 0, you know, something like that, but visibility hidden will be fine. Opacity 0, visibility hidden will keep the actual elements from jumping around the page significantly. Now, it will still affect it a little bit just because this layout isn't exactly how it's going to work, right? Like, for instance, this drawer doesn't exist. It does on paper, but when you actually, or sorry, in the DOM, like it's showing up on the DOM, but then when it's actually loads, it's put somewhere else. So again, it's not an exact science, and it's not a foolproof way to do it. The only foolproof way to do it would be to actually hide the whole body. And then once everything is loaded, you could actually use the custom elements global variable to figure out when all custom elements are loaded. And then you could, once you know that, you can actually slowly, you know, phase in or bring the opacity to 1 using an animation or a transition. And that will probably be the most graceful way to show everything and have it look really clean and beautiful. But let's go ahead and kind of pull this back up. And the way that we have this with the CSS now, once we load it, we can see that that blinking is done. And so everything is beautiful again, and it doesn't do that. And you can see that the buttons work good and everything is great. So that's the drawer. If you wanted to kind of show something else, you could. Now there's some really cool stuff in here, like a color picker, right? That you can actually come in here and you can pick the actual color and everything. And so definitely a lot of cool options. Highly recommend you come in here and play around with it. And yeah, so it's as easy as literally coming in here, copying, and then pasting. And then we're going to pop it back open, right? And so now we have this full-fledged, color picker in here. And there's different options. We can add swatches and all those things as well. And so again, definitely some cool ways, and it treats it just like any other HTML element, right? So the way that that is, obviously, if you were to put these in divs, it would then expand everything to be the whole length of the page, so it wouldn't be right next to each other. And you have these block level elements. And so now we can have 2 block level elements, and boom. All right. So if you want to put some margin, add some margin. And you're good to go, right? And so everything looks good. It's treated exactly like anything. There's no weird things that you have to do for, different frameworks or anything like that. And so everything works out of the box, and it honestly plays really nicely. And you can and everything again is one of the most native that you can get in terms of components. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. I figured it'd be pretty simple and pretty easy for you guys to be able to integrate this, especially using the CDN. If you need to actually build it into like a build process, it gets a little bit more complicated, but their website does provide some examples, and it also provides some pretty good documentation on how you would do it. So I'm gonna make some future videos and integrating it like with things like Next and whatnot, just because I feel like Next is kind of the perfect solution for using something like this. And so we will be releasing something like that soon. So make sure you subscribe and be looking out for future releases. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or questions section below. And definitely reach out to us if there's any additional videos or things that you want us to make content about. So until the next time, we'll see you soon.